Week 17 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I look to buy and trade for this week. The first hitter, James Wood of the Washington Nationals. A lot of fantasy owners, they've given up quickly on Wood, where he was owned pretty much in 80-90% of leagues a few weeks ago. Now only owned in 51% of fantasy leagues. If you want to go out there on the waiver wire and pick him up, I will, because this national team obviously not going anywhere. Sold off some key pieces at the Major League trade deadline. And Wood, he's going to play every day for this Nat team. So on the year, 2 home runs, 16 RBIs, 12 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 245 average, and a 333 on base. James Wood, it's only been 98 at-bats, and already people, it seems like, have given up on him for this season. But I think Wood, he can help an on-base percentage. I know the power numbers aren't where you want them to be, but like I said, he's going to be playing every day in this national team. Traded off most of their veterans off the roster. July 27th at St. Louis, 4 for 5, 2 runs, 2 RBIs. July 28th at the Cardinals, 1 for 4 runs. July 29th at the D-backs, 1 for 3, a run and RBI. July 30th at Arizona, 0 for 2. And July 31st at Arizona, 2 for 4 with a run. So I know fantasy owners, they're not patient nowadays. They want immediate results. But James Wood, he's a young player, and it's going to take him some time. But I believe he can help fantasy owners. He even has someone on your bench, and if he breaks out, then you put him in your starting lineup. But right now, like I said, I think a lot of owners have given up on Wood a little too early, only in the first month that he's been up with the Major League club. And right now, he's got major upside, and he was a top 5 prospect for a reason in the minor leagues. We saw him dominate in the minor leagues. I know it doesn't always translate right away in the major leagues, but I think Wood still has a pretty solid on-base percentage. The average could be way worse. 245 isn't totally horrible, I believe. And it's only been 98 at-bats. So like I said, while people are down on Wood right now when he's out there as well, in 49% of fantasy leagues, he's a hitter I would go out there and buy this week. The next hitter, Nolan Arenado of the St. Louis Cardinals. Arenado, definitely a down year for him in terms of home runs and RBIs. 11 home runs, 45 RBIs, 44 runs scored, a stolen base, 263 average, and a 318 on base. So last season, very similar average and on base numbers, a 266 and a 315 on base, but at least he had 26 homers and 93 RBIs. But the last couple weeks, Arenado, 3 homers, 5 RBIs, 7 runs scored, a 200 and a 273 on base. Arenado and this Cardinal team obviously in the thick of things for a wild card spot. They went out there and bought at the MLB trade deadline, getting Eric Fetty, getting Tommy Pham in a big 3-team deal. And right now, I believe Nolan Arenado, he could get things going. And if he does, this Cardinal team, I think, could make one of those last wild cards. July 27th versus the Nats, 0 for 3. July 28th versus the Nats, 0 for 4. July 29th versus Texas, 1 for 4 with a run. And July 31st versus Texas, 2 for 4 with 2 runs scored. So Arenado, he's not going to be putting up those MVP caliber numbers anymore, obviously, like he did in Coors Field, inflating the stats as well many years of his career. But I think he's still a solid Major League ball player, good defensively, still a good on-base guy. Is Arenado, work the count. Just the power and the RBIs have come down, but it just takes a couple weeks for some of these players to find it, and really they could carry your fantasy teams. Like I mentioned a lot this season in my videos, Matt Olson was someone that I said you just got to go out there and be patient and buy him on your roster, because there's going to be a time where he's going to get hot hitting home runs. And Olson now has had 4 home runs in his last 6 games, so Arenado possibly could go on a run like that. I'm not saying he's a Matt Olson now, but definitely he could find a power stroke for a few weeks and start driving in more runs. And like I said, this Cardinal team, they're in the thick of things. And maybe Arenado, who's been a clutch player throughout his career, comes up in big time now with a couple months left before the regular season's over. The next hitter, Marcus Semien of the Texas Rangers. So Marcus Semien, we know he's been one of the better second basemen in fantasy baseball over the last few seasons. But another player with down season, and the numbers are down to his standards. On the year, 15 home runs, 54 RBIs, 71 runs scored, a 246 average, a 316 on base, and 3 stolen bases. So the power's down, RBIs are down. Last year, 29 and 100 with a 276 average and 14 stolen bases. So across the board, Simeon's numbers are down. And this Texas Ranger team, I know it was a long year. They won the World Series, and sometimes the next season you come out flat. But now, obviously, we're over 100 games into the year. And for players still to be flat, we're just not putting up the stats. It definitely could be a question mark. But I believe Marcus Semien is a true pro, and he really could get things going. Because, like I said, some of these players It only takes them one big month for them to get a majority of their stats, and we've seen it a lot with some players throughout the years where they've struggled 3-4 months of the season, and then all of a sudden, when you look at their stats at the end of the year, their numbers are up to par. So I could see that with Marcus Semien, and he's starting to get the hits going, but just the power and the RBIs, like I said, are down. July 28th at the Jays, 1 for 5. July 29th at the Cardinals, 1 for 5 a run. July 30th at the Cardinals, 0 for 4. And July 31st at the Cardinals, 2 for 3 with an RBI. Bruce Bochy, he made adjustments. Marcus Semien, first time he's not been batting leadoff in almost 2 years, and now over the last 3 games, he's batting third for this Texas Ranger team. So maybe this change can help Marcus Semien. We've seen it with other players like a Francisco Lindor this year. He was struggling the first 2 months of the season, second or third in the lineup. Then the Mets moved him to leadoff, and it turned his season around and the Mets season around. So maybe with Semien moving into the third hole for Texas, they could find something there. But right now, while he's struggling, and like I said, a breakout definitely could be on the way for Semien. He's a buy low hitter this week. Next hitter, Spencer Steer of the Cincinnati Reds. Spencer Steer, it was a great season for him last year, but this season's been a struggle, and this Red team has struggled, and we saw them trade some pieces off as well at the Major League trade deadline. He is now going to move to left field after they traded for Ty France, was the Cincinnati Red team, and also moved a couple other pieces as well on the season for Steer. 15 home runs, 65 RBIs, 54 runs scored, 17 stolen bases, a 234 average, and a 321 on base. But the last couple weeks, he struggled mightily. No home runs, 5 RBIs, 4 runs scored, 3 stolen bases, a 174 average, and a 191 on base. So Steer, very versatile, no doubt about it. First, second, third, outfield eligibility. But his batting average is way down from last season. But the power numbers and RBIs are going to be on par, I believe, in the stolen bases. He's already surpassed what he did last year. So Steer's an underrated player, no doubt about it. But many people might not be that confident in Spencer Steer for the remainder of the season, especially with the slump he's in and not much in that Cincinnati lineup for protection. July 28th at Tampa, 0 for 4. July 29th versus the Cubs, 1 for 4 run. July 30th versus the Cubs, 1 for 5 in RBI. And July 31st versus the Cubs, 0 for 4. So right now, like I said, the last couple weeks, Steer, he's been struggling for the Cincinnati Red team, but his numbers overall have been solid season, no doubt about it. But right now, well, he's on a downturn a little bit. He's a buy low hitter this week, and the fifth and final hitter I look to buy and trade for is Francisco Alvarez of the New York Mets. It's been a struggling year for Alvarez in the home run and RBI department. I know this season he missed about 2 months with the finger injury, was Alvarez, but he struggled mightily, especially the last month of the year and the last couple weeks in the season. 5 home runs, 26 RBIs, 19 runs scored, a 260 average, and a 328 on base percentage. So last season, in 382 at-bats, 25 and 63 with a low average. So the only plus his batting average is up this season is Alvarez. But the last month, like I said, he's been non-existent. 1 home run, 3 RBIs, 3 runs scored, a 185 average, and a 254 on base. Obviously, that's not going to cut it. And he's actually been dropped in a decent amount of fantasy leagues. Right now, out there on the waiver wire is Alvarez in 35% of fantasy leagues. And he's been banged up as well on and off the last few games. July 26th versus Atlanta, 1 for 4, homer and RBI. July 28th versus the Braves, 0 for 4. And July 31st returning after missing 2 games with injury, 0 for 4 with an RBI. So Alvarez, he's been dropped to 7th or 8th in this lineup for the New York Mets, where they had him batting 5th at times. And we'll see if Alvarez could turn things around, because in terms of a schedule coming up, they got some bad pitching staffs the New York Mets are versing in the next week here. They got the Angels and the Rockies coming up the next 2 series, where I think Alvarez, he could turn things around. And right now, well, he's struggling. And we know catch is a weak position where it only takes him a little bit to get back on track, where he could be a top 10, 15 catcher in fantasy baseball. This will be a time to buy him this week. So that's a few hitters I look to buy and trade for Week 17 of the fantasy baseball season.